Hey everyone, you probably know me from my Storybook Brawl videos, but before that I played a lot of Magic. I don't play too much anymore, or I hadn't played too much anymore, but I started playing again and recently hit Mythic in the new set, Bloomburrow. It's been a lot of fun. I just figured maybe I'd share some thoughts on that and maybe start making some videos again. So, just a couple things that I learned while I was getting to Mythic this past couple days actually. First of all, don't draft blue-red autos. This is a two-color draft set, so there's basically the two-color guilds. I think is how people usually refer to them, the ones you can see on the screen. Xurius, Dimir, Rakdos, Gruul, Selesnya, Orzhov, Golgari, Sigmet, Izzet, Boros. Those are the 10 guilds. This set isn't very good for multicolored past that. Let's talk about that later. Unfortunately, they kind of missed the boat on Izzet, or at least so it seems so far. The cards are just, or the strategy is more underpowered than the cards. And I think particularly the red commons seem very, very weak. And the blue-red multicolored cards just don't hit very well. This strategy is just a complete miss. Even if you have a good version of this, you should, you'll see some of the good cards from this late, and you should probably still avoid it. I think you're better off almost never drafting it. If you see good blue cards, or good red cards, take them and play them in the other decks. Like blue green's pretty good. Uh, blue black I've had some success with. Red green seems to be pretty good. Obviously red white. There's a lot of things you can do. Blue white not so great, but there are things you can do with blue and red cards. Just putting them together isn't one of them. Second of all, there are some secret gold cards in this set. That's true of most sets, but particularly this one. A lot of these are obvious, right? Like Star Shape Cleric is a mono black card. Flyer, Offspring. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses life. Obviously, this is meant for the black-white deck, or Zoff, where life gain is the theme. Same with Three Tree Scribe is meant for the frog deck that's bouncing, that's blue-green usually. Or the Korkuskan Mage? I'm mispronouncing that. But all these cards look like they maybe could go in something else, like the mage. Maybe you could think, oh, I'll put in a black deck, help ping. Unfortunately, the stats seem to be terrible when you take, these cards in particular, but also some other cards outside of their intended decks. So, the really good cards in the set are going to go in most decks. We'll talk about that later. But some of the cards need to go in specific decks. So if you're looking at something like 17 lands, make sure that you sort by the color pair you think you're playing, as you're trying to evaluate cards, because you're going to see very different numbers by color pair, which is usually the case in most sets. There'll be some variation, but this set has very high variation for some of these cards that are sort of called secret gold cards. Those are cards that are monocolored, but actually belong in one particular color pair. Secondly, just some surprisingly good cards that I found. These are just a few examples, but I just wanted to touch on them. Carrot Cake, it looks pretty innocuous. It just makes a rabbit and scries on entry, and then when you sacrifice it, you gain 3 life, and then it makes another rabbit and scry again. This looks like it could be a little slow and a little dirtily, but it has good stats in pretty much every deck. Um, and it's just a very strong card. The rabbit's obviously for the go wide. The scry is always helpful. The life gain is decent and helpful in that deck. But also it's just a card that puts a lot of things on the board and just produces a decent amount of incidental value. Intrepid Rabbit, another white card, very very strong. You really, in my experience, you really want to play this on 4. You get the 1/1, and you get a second ETB, which is just target creature gets +1/+1. That really sets up your attacks well a lot of the time. You can make, a 1/1 a 3/3. You can make two 1/1s each a 2/2. A lot of things you can do. Very flexible card. You can play it inside the rabbit deck, obviously, because it's rabbit. So a lot of the cards in this set, there are themes, but it's not as much of a tribal or I think a typal or kindred. I'm not sure which term. I think one of the latter terms is used. I'm not sure which one is which. Um, there's not a lot of things that say buff all your rabbits or require you to specifically have rabbits, but you can see there is a theme that, carries towards the rabbit cards. There are some things that want you to have like a squirrel or raccoon, like we see. Um, like say Cash Grab wants you to have a squirrel, but it's usually, and obviously Scales of the Shale, next card, wants you to have lizards. Polywallop is similar, wants you to have frogs, but that's usually smaller effects, and it's not something, you don't need 15 rabbits to have a good rabbit deck. You might end up with 15 rabbits if you just try to draft a good rabbit deck, but you don't need every card to say rabbit. Um, Scales of the Shale seems like it might just be an expensive combat trick, but if you have lizards, it ends up coming down. I usually casting this for one in the black red deck specifically, and getting lifelink and indestructible is just huge. The life gain's great for some of the black effects that black white effects that trigger. The indestructible just means you can use it to counter removal and just win a lot of combats. Very surprising. A lot of these, expensive combat tricks are rarely good, but this one is sort of surprisingly cheap and also surprisingly good. Cash Grab, we just saw, I think, another set. It was Modern Horizons 3, where Malevolent Rumble, I believe is what it called, was a similar type of card to this. It made an Eldrazi spawn, I think. It lets you put a card from the top. I think that might have put cards on the bottom. This card basically does everything. It puts cards in your graveyard that helps set up the forage, which is the squirrel mechanic. If you have a squirrel, or return to squirrel card. I never actually read that second part of it. You create a food, and that also helps you forage. It basically gets you a permanence. This one's an instant. This just, if you have a squirrel deck, you really want one or two of these. You can play more. At some point, I've got into close to decking and have decked myself a couple times in this format. So something to be aware of. But this is a very strong card. Tree God Duo. There's a lot of times where this just makes one of your creatures enormous when it ETBs, and it gives vigilance, which means it's easier to just swing that attack. It seems good in every green deck. These are all common, so none of them are super busted, but it's been surprisingly good. Sunshower Druid, usually one drops, are not particularly strong. They've been making stronger ones lately, but this is sort of a non-aggressive one. Sort of seems like it's going to come in as a 1/3 gain one life, but that actually shuts down a lot of offense. It's great in the frog deck where you're blinking it. Even just putting the counter on something else later lets you size your creatures appropriately, and just gives you a lot of ability to control sort of the battlefield and how things line up. Baker's Bane Duo just gives you everything you'd want. It's a body. It eventually, can rumble as a 3/3 when you start expending, which is just casting spells, and it makes a food. I think just creating the incidental food is great. The creature types actually really help. This squirrel raccoon thing um, ends up being useful more often than you think. I know I just said sort of the opposite. You don't need to worry too much about creature types, but that's been really good. Light Shell Duo. So blue is weak, but a lot of the blue commons do have pretty high stats in terms of like improvement when drawn, which is actually sort of contrary to some other colors. So this is a pretty decent card that just goes in a lot of bad decks, both Light Shell Duo and Pearls of Wisdom. Pearls of Wisdom, I checked like a few different decks, and it seems like it even without an otter, it's usually pretty strong. Even if you're not playing specific otters, there's incidental otters. This Light Shell Duo is a rat otter. Um, it doesn't look very strong. There is also like a black card draw that does something similar. Um, but yeah, so even though blue red isn't great, there are some blue cards that, and some otter cards specifically, like here, that look like they surprisingly strong. If you knew that blue red was bad, you might think all the blue commons were bad, but that's not the case. On Downward Ambusher, I think this is the only uncommon I have here, but it's just it's a lot stronger than you think. There's actually a few very powerful one toughness things that it picks off. Otherwise, it comes down and it can really affect the combat in a great way. The -1/-1 and just being a 4/2 sort of ambusher is just very strong. And, worst case, you have that destroy something that was dealt damage. Unfortunately, you can't really trigger that if you also want to block with it. Usually, well, almost all the time, right? Not usually, I guess you could ping something somehow. But, yeah, it's been surprisingly strong for me, so. So surprisingly bad cards. We see a few red cards here, and then all the red comments. Maybe I'll talk about the other ones first. Rabbit response. I actually last time I checked the stats, the rabbit response was actually I think at its worst in the white green deck, which is the rabbit deck. Um, it just really doesn't do enough, and I think Warren Elder, who is the creature that has a pump effect for 4 mana, might just be taking up the slots that you want for this. You can't have too many pump spells because you need to pump creatures, but this one, yeah, this one, this one looks similar to an older card called On the Job. No, it's not that old; it's a couple sets ago. That instead of scrying, it investigated, and that was a very strong card, I think, in that set, from what I've been told. But this one is pretty weak in this set, I think. Clifftop Lookout, we always see, so they've been making sets such that they have sort of specific card slots for a while now, and this is sort of the green creature that does well, it does gets a land for you, and we see these a decent amount. Not every set, but a decent amount. It's sort of I think the older version was called Civic Wayfinder. This version unfortunately takes lands from the top of your library, so what it doesn't do is fix your mana. It's also a 1/2, sort of like a Skittering Surveyor, but Skittering Surveyor also could fix your mana. This one has a reach. A lot of creatures in green, a lot of the frogs seem to have reach. I think it's like sort of a tongue thing, part of the theme. Um, but yeah, not fixing your mana seems like it weakens it a good amount. You'd think because you could blink it a lot in this set, and it puts the card onto the battlefield. It's ramp, whereas the other cards, often just search for land. It would be more powerful, but actually, I think what we're seeing is that the numbers make it seem like it's actually not that great. Hazelwood herbalist, green white rabbits or green white in general, I guess, but its theme is rabbits. Seems to be the strongest deck right now, or at least among the strongest decks. But this card, which looks pretty good because it looks like it will just allow you to send in your rabbit tokens, um, as 2/1s, and they'll have depth touch, and you can just sort of trade down their blockers. Unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to play out that well. I guess you can only buff one thing, and a lot of times I think maybe you want to be attacking with more of your creatures, so you don't want to do the slow sort of trading with them. It's always hard to figure out exactly why cards aren't playing out the way you think they should. But this card has like really terrible stats and just hasn't looked good when I've played with it. Bravekin Duo, I think, suffers from the idea that it is a mouse rabbit, so they have these cycle of duo cards, which are sort of straddling two different strategies. And this one is the rabbits and the mouse. You can see the art has a rabbit and a mouse, and its creature type is rabbit and mouse. And for the rabbit, it just is a rabbit, and I guess it buffs creatures. For the mouse, it's has the targeting of a thing, and white red's sort of theme is Valiant. As you can see, the next card, Mouse Trapper, when it becomes a target spell ability for the first time that you control, tap down an opponent's creature. So you want to target your own stuff. Bravekin Duo, I think it's because it has the 1 mana for the activation, just doesn't play out super well. It's also only a sorcery, so it doesn't make combat that tricky for your opponent. This, is something that I think the reason why these are surprisingly bad cards is because this seems like it could be good, and it just doesn't play out, that well. Mouse Trapper, 3/2 Flash just seems like it'd be okay at worst, and it has an ability when it becomes target, you can tap stuff down. That seems like it'd be really strong. Tappers are generally pretty strong. Again, unfortunately, this just doesn't seem to play out that well. I guess maybe the 2 toughness really costs it. It's hard to get it in combat, and it's hard to cast enough stuff on it to get the taps down reliably. And doing so usually will cost you mana. And it's hard to do at the end of turn. It's not like you want to buff this at the end of turn to tap something down, because then you won't have it the next turn. So a lot of times the tappers will get some value out of you can tap something at the end of your opponent's turn, untap, tap them again. Um, but this doesn't really work that way. Or, it could, but it doesn't work that well. most of the time. So yeah, it's been surprisingly bad. And then the last category is just all the red commons. I put here actually the 17 lands data for all the red commons and just the win rates or the improvement when drawn. And I know the last one, I don't actually know which one's which, but take out the trash is this one right here. That's the 3 damage to a target creature. Rummages if you have raccoon. That one's pretty good, unsurprisingly. The rest of them, as you can see, are all pretty bad. Some of them are very bad. Some of them are just okay. To You really would prefer not to play them. Um, and I don't really know why. One of them is Raccoon Rallier. It's a raccoon, so it's a relevant creature type. It gives creature you control haste. And, raccoons sort of want to play their spells because they have expend as their mechanic. You want to play your creatures or your spells in general before combat. You can see the expend mechanic is right here. It's usually expend 4, and it's just when you spend your 4th mana of a turn to cast a spell, so it doesn't count abilities or sacrificing a food or something like that. It triggers the expend. So there's a lot of raccoons that have expend abilities, and a lot of times they're buffing themselves up or buffing other things up. So you usually want to cast stuff before combat, which is exactly what you do if you were tapping to give it haste. So this seems like it should be a nice on-theme card. Just doesn't play out well in practice. I'm not really sure why. It's one of those things that I guess it's hard to it's hard to have these sort of support creatures, especially that we've seen this effect at 1 mana, maybe just at 2 mana. You're spending your 2-drop on something that's in a deck that's trying to swing, obviously because it's giving stuff haste. It just hasn't played well in practice. Uh, Agate Assault, 4 damage that exiles to a creature. It is sorcery, but it's just a removal on this set is not great. Part of that is the offspring spells. They make 2 bodies, and if you're just taking out one of them, it's not as good. The other one is just there's a lot of strong, low drops, and if you're spending 3 mana to kill a 2-drop, especially if you're doing a sorcery speed, you feel like you're getting a little bit behind. So this removal in general, some of the black removal is okay, but this piece of removal is pretty bad. So the bad removal is pretty bad. There's some good removal that still works because it's efficiently costed, like Savor, for instance, or like I think most of the black removal, Nocturnal Hunger, those are all instants too. Um, and even Take Out the Trash is one of the the better red cards. But yeah, if you're playing slow removal, it's just not very good in this set. And Teapot Slinger is a card that I know some people have been pretty excited about, and it seems like it should be good. Menace, I think, is a surprisingly powerful ability, and just dealing 2 damage every turn seems like it could be strong. Unfortunately, it's a pretty average card. It's not a bad card, but it's just surprisingly average, and I think a lot of people are taking it kind of highly. So just be aware of that, and also, yeah, red commons, stay away from them. As good as you think they look, they just haven't played out well. Secondly, the best cards just don't require synergy. You'll see these cards all have specific types that they did part of the theme of the set. We have a rat, we have a lizard, we have a rabbit. But play these cards in every deck, and particularly Shoreline Looter and Thoughtstalker Warlock, you can first pick those cards. They're so strong. Shoreline Looter will just win you games. If it gets going, you'll start drawing cards. It can't be blocked. Like that's it. Like nothing can. It's not like eventually they get a flyer down and they can block it. It's not like it has I don't know some kind of evasion that eventually shuts off, and it just gets better throughout the game. Once you hit threshold, you start drawing cards. You don't have to, you don't have to try to fill up your graveyard. Your graveyard will get full. You're adding a card every turn. When your creatures trade off, you don't have to like try to play a mill strategy. I mean, blue black will be a mill strategy. Blue green might have some cash grabs or whatever, but you don't have to try. This card is so strong. It will just be great no matter what you do with it. Dodge Warlock, same thing. You can play it in the lizard deck. You can try to play it with aggressive creatures, but even if you don't, a 2/2 menace that just makes them discard a card, very strong. If you happen to hit them for some damage, and you get to do the full Thoughtseize, or I guess Coercion is like the old version of the card that people always call it a Thoughtseize, but it doesn't require you to lose life. It's just incredibly strong. So, uh, you know, there's some specific cards, that we're talking about, but the best cards are going to be so strong that they just don't require synergies, even if they benefit from synergies. Just play strong cards. This is sort of an interesting set because even if you were to pick a bunch of black cards, you might end up with a deck that's like half rats and half squirrels. And even if you try to stay open by just picking all of one color or staying into a different colors, since the cards are we have a lot of secret gold cards, you won't actually be as open as you think. But if you just pick up some Darkstalker Warlocks and Shoreline Looters, you're actually very open. You can do whatever as long as you fit those in your deck. Uh, finally, or not finally, we have I think one more thing. Um, don't just play two colors. So as you can see here, so we have three. There are three pretty cool three-color cards. I think the only one with decent stats is Glob, but actually, if you look at Glob's stats, the percentage that you win when it's main decked is almost exactly the same as the blue-green deck without it, or just with no splash. So even though it itself is a very strong card, you're really not gaining anything by splashing it most of the time. So the monocolored, the reason these have asterisks, monocolored splash, they have very low numbers in terms of their actual, like the times people have played them. Very low sample size, I guess, is what I'm looking for. So you really, and as you can see, two color 56%, two color with splash, 53.7, three color 51%. There's no fixing in this set. There's no dual lands. Um, there is like a fabled passage. There is a green card that searches up a land. There's like a weird artifact that can fix you. There's actually a couple that artifacts that fix you. You don't want to splash. It's not good. It's not anything like other sets. You don't splash at nearly the same rates as other sets. Really avoid splashing. And the problem with splashing too is that because a lot of the cards are meant to be synergistic within their particular, I guess, tribe or type, creature type, I guess, you don't want to. You're not going to gain any more of that by going into black. There's not frogs in black that your blue green deck wants, So you can get some powerful black, say like removal, but you just won't have the fixing to play it on time, and it will really cost you. So I avoid splashing. I'd almost think it's never the right decision. You'll be better off if you never splash than if you try to figure it out. If you just stick to don't splash, you'll be pretty good. The villages, these look like they'd be super free, and a lot of times we talk about because modern sets have so many great playables, you can try to get a lot of value from your land slots, but and these don't come into play tapped, so they look like they'd be super free. Unfortunately, they don't. They add the color of mana, but only to cast creature spells. And that seems like it wouldn't be a big deal. Most of your deck is going to be creatures, but this will cost you a surprising amount when you draw your lands. Like so, for instance, if you have a red spell, you won't be able to cast it with the Rockface Village. And you might think that wouldn't matter, but if you have two forests in a Rockface Village in your red-green deck, then you can't cast any of your Take Out the Trashes, and a lot of times you'll just sort of get stuck. And this has bitten me more than I thought. I drafted the villages very highly to start. Looking at the stats, Lupin Flower Village has pretty good stats. I think it's pretty good improvement, as does Mudflat Village. I think it's a little bit worse, but it has decent stats. Lilypad Village is basically flat nothing in terms of any kind of improvement. And the other two, Oco and Rockface, have negative stats, like negative improvements. You hear me referencing 17 lands a lot. I think it's a good sort of. I think referencing stats really helps you, understand, larger sample sizes than you're going to be able to get yourself. I actually found Oak Hall Village to be pretty good. I think there are definitely decks that it seems like, would benefit from it. But before you put any of these cards in your deck, check specifically, do you have a lot of spells, non-creature spells in that color? If you have all green creatures, Oak Hall Village becomes almost free. If all your green spells are creatures, I guess. But if you start having, combat tricks and, maybe some, fight spells, and you just can't cast them on time with your Oak Hall Village, you're just going to lose yourself games, and they won't win you that many games comparatively. These cards, getting value out of your land slot is a lot about incidental value, and this just doesn't get you there most of the time. So that's it. Yeah, I mean, I hit Mythic pretty quickly. It's been really fun, and yeah, I have some drafts I could upload if people are interested. I imagine about most of the people are here just for Storybook stuff, and if you unsubscribe because obviously I'm not making any more Storybook videos right now or for the foreseeable future because again the game's not around. I understand. I might play some Magic. I might play some TFT. If anyone else has games they're playing that, scratch that storybook-ish, I'd love to hear from it. I hope you like this. I know gameplay videos are usually more popular than this type of stuff, but I do like making sort of discussion videos as well. So that's what I got. I do have some gameplay videos I might upload if people are interested. So have a good one.